All right, let's go ahead and begin. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for being here on this continually rescheduled meeting of the spring. Thank you for your flexibility. As you know, the schools have had to be pretty flexible too. So thank you for being here today, as well as for the staff that's had to reschedule to join us as well for this committee. We have Kevin joining us as a new person here. Brian's also new, but he is out of town. But I think for the sake of that, why don't we go around and introduce ourselves? And I'm going to make this a little interesting here and say, so certainly your name, where you're from, and then when I say your favorite spring break memory, the first thing that comes to mind.
Melissa Rooker. I represent the Shawnee Mission East area.
A city, country, place you went for fun.
Sarasota.
There you go.
Kevin Broom, Shawnee Mission North District. Thanks for having me. It's the first time. Camping in Dinosaur National Monument down in the southwest for spring break.
Way more interesting committee member than me.
I am Tyler Clubb, Director of Facilities, and I think one of my memories would be camping or time off, time away.
Russell Knapp, I'm the CFO, and multiple family spring break trips to Florida.
Brad Stratton, and I'm one of the board members for the school district. And since I had more time to think about this than you did, one of mine was taking our young daughter to the Capitol in Topeka, and she talked me into walking the stairs all the way to the very top, something I will never, ever do again in the rest of my life. That was really scary.
I'm Mary Sinclair. I'm also one of the board representatives, and I would just say family and friends trips to Colorado skiing. Nothing super, yeah.
Joe Gilhouse, Deputy Superintendent, and I'd probably just have to say generically, just the family vacations that I'd say the time spent with family is always best and special.
Terry Wintering, I'm assistant to Dr. Hubbard, Dr. Gilhouse, and I'm also the clerk of the board. And favorite memory, I guess we have a timeshare in Palm Springs, so we love to go there. So that's what we did. Not this year, though. I worked.
Susan Lindahl. I'm a member at large of the Finance and Facilities Committee. Favorite memory would be a golf trip each year to Arizona. So family golf trip. So that's my favorite.
I'm Ryan Weininger. I'm representing Shawnee Mission Northwest, and I would say either going to Florida to the Royal Spring Training as a boy or taking my boys to learn to ski in Colorado.
Right. Well, thank you all for sharing that as well, so we get to know each other a little bit more through that. And Dr. Hubbard passes along her best. As you could well imagine, her schedule requires her to be in 3 places at once, and it just so happens this wasn't one of the 3 places this time. No, she's engaged in our real-world learning meetings, I believe, today. So she passes along a hello from herself to us. With that, we'll move on to item number 2, and this is an update on the COVID-19 relief funds, the expenditures, ESSER, the acronym for the funding, federal funding, ESSER 3 priorities, and I'll turn it over to Russ Knapp and Dr. Gilhouse.
Yes, thank you. So they wanted, the first agenda item, they just wanted to give you guys a quick update where we're at on all our ESSER monies. This chart up here that you see on the screen, we presented this to the board back in February, I believe. Shawnee Mission is working with ESSER 1, ESSER 2, and ESSER 3 federal dollars. ESSER 1, we have spent all of our allocation. There's only $13,000 left, and that's in the private schools to spend. That all has to be spent by September 22, so we're good there. A lot of that was used to buy PPE equipment, supplies, air scrubber machines, some large software applications to go pivot from being in person to virtual learning from home. Through Johnson County Sparks money, we were able to get reimbursed $1.2 million for a lot of large equipment purchases there. We are currently spending ESSER $2 in this fiscal year. We got about $10.6 million there. Through February, we're at 7.3. Approximately about 56 positions were added, that's social workers, counselors. We reduced elementary class sizes. So a lot of those are positions, so they're just gradually spending that money down as we go through the fiscal year. We have about $7.3 million left. In September of '23, we have to have it all spent. And just this week, we submitted our application for ESSER 3. We're going to get $23.7 million. The administration team has planned out how they're going to spend that over the next 2 fiscal years. So we have requested half of that, and we'll use that as a continuation of the plan that we put in place for ESSER 2 with just a few tweaks. We'll use half of that for 22-23, and the second half of that for 23-24. We'll have to go back and submit another application for that second half. So that's kind of where we're at on ESSER 1, 2, and 3.
Can I have you pause right there? And I want to turn to Melissa to see if you want to provide some input from your perspective professionally on these allocations.
Yeah, so thank you, Brad. Longtime listeners probably know that I serve on the Commissioner's Task Force on ESSER and EANS at KSDE headquarters. So we're on the receiving end of the applications on a monthly basis. So if Shawnee Mission's application went in this week, the cadence of the review process is that we meet the Friday afternoon before the State Board of Education meets. They meet the second Tuesday and Wednesday of every month. So I don't know if there's enough lead time for the Shawnee Mission application to be part of the next round for the April board meeting or not. But by May board meeting, theoretically, your application will have been, it'll get reviewed by staff at KSDE, make sure all the details are as they should be and compliance. It's a compliance review. We then have the board meeting to talk about on the task force. We'll walk through any red flags that the agency finds they bring to the task force. So sometimes the task force thinks they were interpreting something, a wrong way, and we might overturn the recommendation and go ahead and forward it. Sometimes we uphold it. But basically, our process is a public meeting to review the applications and then make recommendations to the State Board of Education, and they are the ones who make the final approval. So I would expect that we'll hear something in the next month or two on the application. I just also wanted to flag the private allocation. People might not understand that the federal funding included funds for private schools, but the way Title I works as a formula, and jump in, Russ, if I describe this inadequately, but Title I funds flow through the public school system, and we support private schools, but they do not receive the funding directly, and they don't make their purchases directly. So that would be that private allocation, right? So their applications also had to go through this Commissioner's Task Force process, but the federal funds never go directly to the private schools.
For ESSER 2, ESSER 3, though, the private allocation did not flow through the public schools.
It's going through Greenbush Service Center, so they are serving that role of the public entity that will support what they need.
And once the State Board approves it, how quickly does the money come available?
I think once it's approved, it's
Immediately?
available for drawdown. So federal funds, all of these dollars, we don't get to draw them down and sit on them. They're drawn down as expenses are incurred. So you can do a drawdown for payroll in the month ahead, but you can't draw down for anything farther out in the future than that, is how I understand it.
That's great.
Thank you.
Let's see. There we go. With the ESSER 3 guidelines, they're basically the same as ESSER 2. They did add one, or they added two. One was about 20% to go towards learning loss, and we more than have that covered with a lot of the software and the additional personnel that we added. But the other one was you had to get a stakeholder engagement from your various folks in your community, and they're listed there on the slide. Back in December of 21, we did a thought exchange to all of our community and got those results back. And this next slide, we grouped them into parents and guardians. They basically said reduce class sizes. Students came back, and most of their comments and thoughts were around mental health issues. And the district employees came back with retention payment or salary comments. So with that input, a lot of our ESSER 2 plan already had those things incorporated. So ESSER 3, again, is a continuation. We did add additional social workers and counselors to kind of help with that mental health. We reduced class sizes at the elementary, added math teachers at the secondary level to kind of address the learning loss. Substitutes, we added a lot of allocation to substitutes because we just are struggling to keep teachers in the classroom. And so we went a different approach and hired kind of a long-term sub. So a full-time sub, you show up at Shawnee Mission Northwest every day, we'll find a spot for you. So we did that through all our secondary buildings, and that's been pretty successful. Another thing we did was we called it a little bit of a premium pay for Mondays and Fridays to get the on-call subs enticed to come in, and that worked pretty well. So our substitute fill rate, we survived. We've done pretty well compared to our neighbor school districts. So that's where a lot of the ESSER 3 money is going. We did have 3 ESSER teams form when we did the plan for ESSER 2. So we had an elementary, middle, and high school team form made up of teachers and a few administrators. Gave them allotment about $750,000 and said, how do you need to spend this in the classroom to target learning loss from the pandemic? And so they have their own little allocations, and they'll continue to do that for ESSER 2 next year with ESSER 3 money, and the following year after that. So this is our plan right here. And then we did have about $2.8 million in there for HVAC, and based on the survey results, we took $2 million of that and submitted in our application for a retention payment. We did do a retention payment of $600 last year. We gave that out in September for those teachers that met the criteria to return. Well, it was all staff that came back for the next school year, and so the plan is to continue that for next school year as well.
I do want to make reference to that. Even though we did pull $2 million out for that retention payment, we didn't ignore the HVAC challenges. We pulled that money out of capital outlay. So we continued to do the HVAC improvements and upgrades to meet the necessary requirements while we were dealing with COVID, but it was pulled out of capital outlay, so it wasn't ignored.
Yes, go ahead.
So I'm going to start with just a quick logistics piece. Is this chart, I believe, is available or pretty close to this on the district website? This level of detail, correct? I'm sorry we did not get a link to you all beforehand on this chart.
It's in board docs right now, but once we get it submitted and approved, we'll place it out there under our ESSER 3 funds on the website, yes.
Okay.
So ESSER 1 and 2.
The ESSER 2 are there, which are fairly similar.
Yes.
Yeah, okay. I would be curious to, and I don't know, Dr. Gillis, if this is a question for you, to think about our use of ESSER funds in relation to math instruction and learning recovery. And in part, if anyone's tuning into the legislature, there's been a lot of conversation this session about the use of a program called Math Nation, but more broadly, how are we addressing the needs of our students in relation to mathematics and those learning recovery challenges. So if you were to take a look at our ESSER plans in relation to some of our broader initiatives, how would you?
Correct, and that was one of the first things that we addressed in the ESSER 1 and 2 by adding those math teachers, because we saw the biggest gap within the math classes. We're continuing to follow that data. We're in Kansas assessment season right now. Dan Grumman and his team, we've continued to, as well as the principals, in dissecting and disaggregating that data to continually see where we are at with math and what other things we need to implement as we are going along. I think we'll get a nice gauge from the Kansas assessment. We also continue to use our MAP testing and MAP scores and look at that and see where we need to plug, enrich, modify, or go back and actually reteach when it comes to the math curriculum.
And then are there other components of that, like any support for tutoring or summer school or any of those other instructional materials that
We
dovetail
have.
into
We
that?
actually, part of the secondary plan was to pay for summer school free for students. All they had to do was sign up so we could address some of that learning loss in that area. Tutoring is an ongoing process. We've even gotten more tutoring money than we've had in the past, and so we continually use that and set up different programs after school to meet kids' needs, to meet their needs in math if there's a deficit in their learning.
To piggyback on that, though, the conversation in Topeka is really around virtual math tutoring programs. They have a particular brand that they're pushing, but it's my understanding the district adopted a tool.
I don't know a whole lot about that. No, I can't elaborate on that.
Is it IXL?
I don't know.
Mary, do you know?
I thought we approved, I'd have to go back. I thought we approved a contract with IXL as a supplemental
I just
instructional
can't-
resource
yeah.
tool.
I don't want to get out over my skis.
Yeah.
and-
Got it. Okay.
Well, but why don't you finish that thought? Is there flexibility in the final bill that it doesn't have to necessarily be the one math company?
There is language that's under discussion, negotiation today that includes, it struck the brand name and instead says a virtual math program and then has a set of criteria that must be met. So in reading it, it reads as if it's prescriptive to the one company they want to have, but I don't, that's why I'd love to know more about IXL, if that's the direction this district has chosen to go.
Thank you.
December 21st of 2020 is when we approved. Okay, you're faster than me. Part of the question was, I appreciate you describing kind of the multiple approaches that are used to support math instruction. It's not just about one instructional tool, but it's multiple strategies
Absolutely.
used to address that component.
Can I clarify that for people who don't know what MAP testing is, I think that's important to talk about how that differs from the state assessments, which are those annual summative.
Correct. And we give MAP tests 3 times a year, in the beginning of the school year, in the middle of the school year, and at the end, towards the end. And so basically what it is just a gauge for us to see where our kids are at when we begin. And you can dig into such finite data when it comes to a student's performance on their MAP tests that we can see where the deficits are, where we can move on in the curriculum. No need to go back and reteach if the students already had the foundation for that. And so we continue to look at that. Dan Grumman does an outstanding job. He presents to the board a couple times a year with our MAP data. And so we're always looking at that, and it's always looking for best practices for our teachers to find out and meet the students where they are.
But so that's real time. That's
Real time,
testing.
absolutely.
That teacher sees results for the students in the class.
That's correct.
That school year differs from state assessments, which are taken now in springtime. The results aren't published and provided till
Correct.
fall.
We get immediate feedback on it, and it's specific to that classroom, and it's specific to that individual. And so it's amazing how much data that we can pull from MAP testing, so to meet the kids' needs.
Okay. So Terry just found for me, so on July 26th, the 2021 board meeting, we approved the IXL contract. for math and for reading pre-K through 12. So,
Thanks. Great.
thank you.
Other questions, comments, observations about what's being presented here with ESSER 3 before we move on to the annual budget? Well, thank you for that update, and we'll move on to the budget. I'll just tag this on the front end. We'll walk through a little bit about a reminder of this process, and equally, there's a lot of conversation, including some media reports about our neighbors that are walking through the same process. So this is really good timing for this conversation. And so with that, I'll turn it back to Russ.
Yes, so we are coming upon the most busiest time for our business office and presenting the budget to the board and the community and going through the approval process. This started back really October and November is when we start our budget process for the next fiscal year. We send out requests to our departments. We do a lot of projections early on to revenue projections, student enrollment projections, et cetera, and then we fine tune those as we go through the school year, because the closer you get to the year, the more stable your projections can become. So in January, we do estimations on our revenue numbers, and then we pay very close attention to what's going on in Topeka, if anything's going to change funding-wise. It's been stable the last couple of years for finance purposes. Prior to that, it was always a crystal ball, but it has been stable here lately. It looks like we'll get through this legislative session unscathed finance-wise. There's a lot of other policy issues and stuff that probably will happen, but finance, we're good. So we present to our cabinet leadership team in January the first draft of the budget. They go over a lot of the requests, personnel requests, and that's where we approve things or will remove things from the budget at that time. The HR team in February goes through a staffing allocations with all our building principals at the elementary, middle, and high level. They go through, they base it on our projected enrollment for next school year, and they'll go through all the various staffing that they will need for the next fiscal year. If we need to add teachers, we put that in the budget. If we can remove some positions, we'll take that out of the budget before we present it to the Board of Education. Then negotiations have already started. They start in February, but a lot of times the last piece of that negotiation is around money, salary and benefits, until we can present the budget to the Board of Education. A lot of it is just geared towards May, is because that's when the legislative session adjourns, and then they come back for a veto session, and we have a good idea that our funding is stable for the next year. So we'll present that to the Board of Education in May, and as shortly after that, Joe and the IBB team will start discussing salary raises right after that.
So, I'm sorry, just to
Go ahead.
go back. So the staffing, I'm sorry, can you go back one? So the staffing allocation in some ways is kind of speaks to the workload piece in terms, at least in terms of, not like at the secondary level, teaching 5 out of 7, or staffing guidelines at the elementary level. That kind
Yeah,
of
the
piece.
staffing.
Like those are kind of determined a priori, and absolutely, yeah.
Do you want to elaborate where the money came for 5 out of 7 and then?
Yeah, the 5 out of 7 is beyond the staffing allocations that I'm talking about. This is our normal process we do every year. We just are right-sizing all our staffing to what our projected enrollment is. The 5 out of 7 came out of the strategic plan, and we are using custodial salaries. We had the ability to move custodial salaries from our operating funds over to the capital outlay funds, and we did that over a 2-year plan. And so the first year was this year, and the second year will be, the second half of that will be next year, and that was about a little bit over $4 $7.5 million that we moved to the capital outlay fund to be able to add additional teachers so they can teach 5 out of 7 versus 6 out of 7.
That's correct. And we actually have very few teachers that will be teaching 6 next school year, a handful, but due to the complexities of a master schedule, you always run across certain anomalies or singletons when it comes to high school or middle school schedules. So in that case, what we have negotiated is where that teacher would be paid a stipend for accepting that 6th period class. And that is negotiated with HR through the building principal and with HR, and that price has been set through IBB.
So one of the most contentious current policy provisions in the negotiations underway in Topeka, really, as I look at this calendar of events in your budget cycle, the open enrollment provision that would allow out-of-district families to request a spot for their students in this district, they have till fall in the timeline. They have a September date by which they have to make that request. So are you equipped to speak to how that impacts, like how you're going to figure out capacity for that if you're making these types of staffing projections in the springtime?
It would be impossible to project staffing. There's no way that we could do staffing accurately. We still haven't heard how we're going to determine capacity. Do we get to determine capacity, or does the state determine capacity based upon square footage, number of rooms, size of rooms? I mean, we have no idea what that is. But our staffing is done in January and February to determine how many teachers we need based on enrollment and how many sections we need. So anything later than that, it's impossible for us to project. If we had an influx of students come or leave, it would be very detrimental. It would be a challenge, and that is just a very small piece of the challenge of that open enrollment plan. What does transportation look like? Who comes? What is capacity? When you're at capacity, what happens when people move into your community? Do you turn down those students that actually live in your area? So there's way more challenges with open enrollment than there are solutions, in my opinion.
Thank you.
Other questions on this timeline here? Got the next page.
So this is just my second slide on the budget timeline, and so now that the slide I just covered is a lot of the internal process that we take to develop our budget. Now this, we kind of switched to the statutory process. So the approval process of the budget in Kansas is driven all by statute. So other than these first 2 items, we do a budget workshop May 9th to the board and May 23rd to the board. The first one is non-operating funds. We'll talk about here in a little bit, and then the second one is more important one, is the operating funds. And so we'll present that to the board. And then I believe on May 26th, there's an IBB meeting that they'll talk about the salary increase and benefits for the first time.
And could you, I'm going to interrupt and say, could you explain IBB, just what's the
IBB, interest-based bargaining. That's the concept that our negotiations between our NEA union and the school district uses.
Great, thank you.
We went to that maybe 2 years ago now? Okay, yeah. So one of the things the legislators added last spring was the revenue neutral bill. So we went through that last year. It's a process of Johnson County provides us a calculation of if your mill rate stayed the same and your assessed valuation goes up, they calculate a revenue neutral rate to keep your mill rate at that, so you do not get additional taxes just because your assessed valuation goes up. And so they calculate that amount, and the 20 mills alone, which is state law, that forces every school district to do the revenue neutral rate, because your assessed valuation is going to go up. You're going to generate more revenue, and state law says you have to do 20 mills. And so there's that little increment that's probably going to be an increase for everybody, unless the whole school district's assessed valuation decreases, but the majority of everybody's goes up.
Well, it seems to me, although the law prescribes that the school district has to hold that hearing on the 20 mills, it's the state legislature that controls that levy.
That's correct.
This district has nothing to do with whether you adjust down to 19.2 mills to get to that revenue neutral number or not. You have no power to do that because it's set in state law. So I think there are certain mills that the board can vote to change, but the baseline 20 mills is not one of them.
That is correct. So that was added, and so it's a resolution, it's a publication in the newspaper, and then it takes board approval. We notify the county that we're going to exceed our revenue neutral rate. Since it was implemented last year, this will be the first year now that the county will be sending out. You'll get a postcard in the mail saying the Shawnee Mission is going to increase their revenues based on this revenue neutral rate bill. So our mill levy, they'll estimate a mill rate that we're going to increase it on that postcard.
Can we also clarify that the district does not receive the 20 mills directly? We used to.
That's correct.
But state law changed in the 2010s, so the 20 mills are levied through state law. It's local property taxes that are sent to the state treasury, and then as part of the state general fund, they help fund the formula statewide to fund schools, but it is not the district receiving that amount of additional income, right?
That is correct. So school districts just get their money versus through the state aid formula that I'll show you here in a minute. But yeah, all the taxes are all local and just sent to the state and then distributed through the formula.
I hesitate to raise these, but we're literally in that week of the legislature where so many things flying around. One of them is raising the level that a property is exempt. So is that something that we would eventually begin running numbers on? Because the assessed valuation is here, but if I understand the proposed bill, it takes the exempt amount on someone's property higher.
Yeah,
And that would impact us or not?
That it does. In the grand scheme of things, it could, but it's only on the general fund. And so like Melissa just said, all that general fund money is collected and set to the state. So it would reduce the amount of revenue that the state collects into their operating funds that they push out to all the
90
school
million,
districts.
right?
But it doesn't reduce their obligation to fund at the level the law says they're supposed to fund. So it's really cutting their own revenue stream.
Yes.
Interesting. Thank you.
Okay, well, there is a bill to exempt schools, right, from the revenue neutral, but is that just a piece of it? We would still have to go through this process for,
It exempts the 20 mills.
but not anything else?
But I don't know that it's moving.
Okay.
And just quickly to follow up the timeline, once we get past the revenue neutral rate, then we are required to publish our budget in the newspaper, have a 10-day waiting period, and then we have to have a public hearing. That's what we publish in the newspaper, that date and time. So you got to have a hearing on the revenue neutral rate, and you got to have a hearing on the budget. And then once it is approved and adopted, then we submit it to county and the state. So that's kind of the quick timeline of how we develop our budget and get it approved. Okay. You want to keep going on
Yeah.
the Budget 101 now?
Yeah.
So we kind of want to introduce some of the slides of Budget 101 because we have two new people on the committee, and then maybe it'd be a good refresher for the rest of you. You might have seen this slide before. We use this to describe the different buckets. So we have close to like 39 individual funds. All those are allowable by state law. And we segregate them in these 5 buckets. And so the very first one is the important one. That's the operating budget. That's where we get our state aid and our local taxes. And we call that our operating funds. And that pays for all our salaries, student transportation, and utilities. Obviously, we're labor intensive. 84% of our budget goes towards salaries and benefits. And so that's the one fund that we don't have a lot of local control. We're at the mercy of what the state says, how much they're going to fund public education. And so that's the operating funds. The next big chunk is our capital outlay budget. It's restricted for purposes there listed. As you can imagine, it's purchasing equipment and renovations and et cetera. A few years ago, they expanded it to include large software purchases and uniforms, like a band uniform, which makes sense because a band uniform, they'll use those for 10 years and they'll cost $200,000 to buy those. So capital outlay handles a lot of our daily operations. We don't call it operating funds, but it handles, Tyler has, close to $40 million that we buy. A lot of our technology, we do all our repairs in our buildings through this fund. So it's very important to us. That is 8 mills. So that is all local taxes, and Shawnee Mission does not qualify for any state aid for capital outlay. There is a state aid component at the state level. We do not qualify for that. The other one is...
Can you explain?
Go ahead.
We don't qualify because of our
Assessed valuations. So there's a calculation at the state level that they do AV per capita, or I'm not sure what it's called, but it's just based on your assessed valuation per student, and then they just rank them. And so if you're up here at the top, you're not going to get state aid. So Olathe still might get capital outlay state aid, but for the most part, Johnson County schools do not.
So that's an interesting question of whether the property tax exemption, does that then affect the assessed valuation calculation perhaps? Could it?
It could, because it would reduce your general, they now do 3 assessed valuation amounts, a general fund, a regular one, and then one for capital outlay. So, yep, that could have an impact.
I have a question too. Yeah, you listed the maintenance salaries on this particular slide. Aren't there other salaries that would qualify under capital outlay that would be allowable, technology salaries, for instance? And I know you said you'd
Yeah,
moved
we have for some years, since 2001, we've had all our skilled tech positions over there. So those are our plumbers, HVAC electricians. And so those have been over there for some time. And now we're going to move that custodial salaries over there that you talked about. We do not have any technology salaries in there.
But they would be allowable.
I don't know about that. What makes you say that?
I'm just asking, as you know, in comparison to other districts and kind of best practices in the area, I wondered if those were utilized for capital.
We
outlay.
don't. I would say that's a gray area. I'm not sure if I would agree with that being an allowable use out of capital outlay.
Okay. Thank you.
Do we currently maximize that capital outlay guideline? So
Yeah,
the
well,
board adopted, right?
Yeah,
You
so
getting there?
that's a good point.
Just,
Susan, we'll talk, I got a slide coming up here and we can talk about that a little bit
Yeah.
more, where we're at on that. So I'll keep moving here.
I'm just looking for relief, that we could move to help the classroom and help teachers. So I know you are too. I know you've scrubbed those areas, but I just needed to ask, so
Yeah.
thank you.
Back in January, 21, right? We did a $264.2 million bond referendum that was approved. Nearly 70% of the community voted yes. So we are actively spending that money. Tyler's going through it like it's candy right now, but we have that going on, and then bond and interest fund is what is used to pay for the bonds that we sell. And so that's all local taxes. Again, there's a state aid component of that we do not qualify for as well. Then a big chunk of our federal budget is Title I and Title 6B, which is Title 6B is for special education. Title I goes for a lot of reading and math in our free and reduced elementary schools, high free and reduced count in our elementary schools. And then also all our ESSER monies will flow through the federal funds. We have a handful of self-supported funds. We call them self-supported because through fees or a grant or other sources such as gifts or grants, that we're able to support all the expenditures with those funds, and we do not have to transfer money from the operating fund. So that's where the self-support comes from. And you can think of your food service programs, summer school, or your big two there in the self-supported funds. And then there's another bucket, flow-through budget, and that's just money that touches our account and then goes right back to the state, and that's the CAPERS flow-through and the cost of living. So it's part of our budget, but we don't get to spend that. It just touches our budget and goes straight to the state.
Can we also clarify that while salary for staff, for current staff members includes fringe, which would include payments that relate to their retirement, right? That piece of it is kind of helping pay down the debt, the legacy debt in the CAPER. Like, Brad, you probably have a little bit of insight into this from some of your other board seats.
I do. So help me with the question. New dollars or current dollars?
Well, I think some of that flow through, people think, well, yeah, I mean, you have staff, so that's their fringe that's flowing through, but it's a lot of paying down.
Right. Well, that's why I was asking for clarification. There's a proposal that I heard today is now over $1 billion that will go to pay both legacy indebtedness as well as to raise the total funded ratio for CAPERS.
But the state has a major unfunded liability to CAPERS, and
yeah, so I'm smiling because I was just on the phone talking about this. So this would get us in the 81-82% funded range.
which is pretty good.
Yeah, which it's funny to say because CAPERS is a pension system. You want to be 100% funded, right? But 80 is really good compared to our peers and what the actuaries tell us. That was in the high 50s not that long ago. So there's been an achievement to fund CAPERS at a more higher, and I'll call it responsible level, but a lot of that flows through our district budgets, I think is your point.
Yep.
So can I ask a question about that a different way? So I'm just projecting as dollars get restored to the school finance formula, and as that unfunded obligation gets built, gets addressed, more money per pupil total will be allocated in the line item of, public education. So if we were to look at like a per pupil dollar allocation according to these columns, we would maybe see a bigger bump in that black column of the flow-through dollars, which is, it's good, right, to have that funding security for retirement, but does it give us any ability as a district to do anything with operating budget choices in the kind of blue and red column?
I'm going to let you go first, but I guess my thought would be that's a legislative decision, meaning isn't that part of the total legislative budgeting process?
It is. But I think what Mary's probably getting at is there's a lot of rhetoric out there that will say Kansas is spending huge numbers per pupil that belie what we are actually allowed to spend on the pupils, right? So, or they're factoring in all funds, and claiming credit for bond payments or parent-paid fees or whatever. I'm so technically not wrong. That is money being spent on the public system, but it isn't money available in the classroom. It might build the classroom, but it isn't helping with the overhead for the students in seats in classrooms.
Correct. And I don't want to go too far in the weeds on any of this, but the question will be, at what point is the pension fund fully funded? How is that budgeting conversation changed? And I think that's what you're saying.
This next slide is basically just the same thing that you just saw with the 5 buckets. These are all the individual funds that the school district has that is broken out into those same categories. So if you ever want to get into the weeds, you could go here and look and see the different funds that make up our different buckets that we talk about.
And these are on the district website as well, links to some of these details?
Yeah, it's in under our budget and finance page. Kind of wanted to talk to you a little bit more about the self-supportive funds or the operating funds, since that is what drives our day-to-day. As we talked previous, it covers all our salaries and benefits. This is where we receive our general state aid, our LOB taxes, or all local taxes, and then our special education state aid, all run through the operating funds. And so those are the three large sources of our revenue that come into the operating funds, and those are all controlled. General fund, LOB, and SPED is all funded by the finance formula from the state. Even our local taxes is controlled by that formula. And so I'll quickly go through and give you kind of the budget 101 part of how our general fund and LOB fund is calculated. So all school districts, the official head count day is September 20th in Kansas. So that's why it's so important. So whatever kid shows up on September 20th is your enrollment count. Now there's a little bit for absences, but for the most part it's September 20th. You start with your base number of FTE enrollment. So FTE is full-time equivalent. So if a kid is part-time, not 360 contact minutes, that's a full-time student. Anything less of that is part-time. We have to submit that up through the KIDS system for every student in the district. And it comes to $26,820. And then from there, there's additional weightings that you can add on for additional services that we provide. So bilingual, there's two methods you can calculate it. That generates 456 additional FTE. CTE is your career and tech education. Used to be called vocational. The weighting is worth an additional 50%. That generates 597. Your at-risk counts are based on your free lunch criteria in the federal lunch program. That generates additional weighting there. I'm going to jump to transportation. If you transport a kid 2.5 miles or more, you get additional weighting. And then they have a component, low enrollment and high enrollment. We qualify obviously for the high enrollment, so we get additional weighting there. The cost of living, essentially just an additional LOB is what it boils down to. The most you can be is 5%, and we are there now. This budget that we're in this year, we finally hit the 5%. That generates another 1,858 FTE. Special ed flows through the general fund. Just to confuse you more, it does not count towards the general fund, but it flows through because you can get LOB on that. And so based on 26,819 kids and all the additional weightings, our general fund would get funded based on 39,000 FTE, weighted FTE. Okay?
The percentages are percentages of the FTE enrolled or the 39,000? So the percentage after like bilingual?
That's what the weighting is worth. So there's a little bit of a formula, and bilingual is worth 39% of the total FTE contact minutes it generates.
Okay, so not necessarily 39% is bilingual in the district?
No. That's the weighting.
But can I flip that around and ask it this way? So someone who's determined to be bilingual, they count as 1.395 of a person. And I hate to say it that way, but, okay.
That is right.
All right.
Of their contact minutes. So we have to calculate all the contact minutes and submit that up to the state.
Okay.
Okay.
Real quick, so with this news that we're hearing from the districts around us about having to address some changes in their budget, is this the place to point to that? Because it's a weightings issue that other districts are dealing with.
Right. So you're probably hearing a little bit about Blue Valley and Olathe. They have received a weighting called extraordinary growth. So there's a weighting that if you're adding X amount of kids year after year after year, and it meets the criteria in the law, you can go to BOTA, Board of Tax Appeal, and say, we meet the criteria of the law, we can levy an additional tax. And so that's all local tax. So Blue Valley, Olathe, for years, they've been able to have extraordinary growth. They do a tax local, and they get to keep that. They no longer qualify, and I believe the law weans you off over maybe a 5-year period. And so Blue Valley, I think, is around $3 million they're losing every year. And they've been at it, they're probably in year 3 of the wean off. Olathe is just kind of starting. And so, and Olathe reduction is considerably more.
Your total over a certain period of time?
Say that again?
So when you're saying it's an accelerated growth, is that a percentage of their weighted FTE that's changing year to year, and now they're not qualifying with that?
That's correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then what is that number compared to other districts?
The 39?
Yeah.
We are probably third largest number there. Olathe would be probably up in the, I'll guess about 44,000. Wichita is your largest. They would be way up and around 50 to 60.
And then when you say Olathe, I kind of loaded these numbers. Obviously, high risk, those ones that carry the 1.39 that you're talking about. Is Olathe's number higher because there's more of that type of population, or is it just an overall number of kids?
They're higher because they have the extraordinary growth and they got more kids.
Okay.
Yeah. Our free and reduced count is higher than Olathe's or Blue Valley. We're about
Third?
34% now around that in free and reduced kids.
Melissa?
I just want to clarify, I think in 2017, that extraordinary growth weighting, there was a phase out put into the law. So there's been like a 5-year lead that this is the trajectory. So
Yeah, it was originally 2 years and
I think got
it
extended.
was extended to 5.
Thank you. I just thought that would be a helpful slide to add that part too, because we're going to see that in public conversations.
Okay, so you calculate the general fund authority is it's kind of complex to get here, but it's very simple. Whatever that weighted FTE number comes to, the state legislators determine what that base amount is. It's 4,846 currently for this year, so our general fund authority would be $189 million, and that's what we get to spend, okay? We can't spend $1 more than that, or we get penalized, but we can spend less than that. So basically, the general fund says, the way the Kansas formula, it goes through the math, and it tells you how much you get to spend, okay? Not really how much you get to receive, it's how much you get to spend. So we're at 189 million.
So am I right in recalling, if you go back one slide, that 2019, June 2019, so it would have been the 2019-20 school year maybe, was the first year that we could reliably predict what our revenue formula would be and what the funds were? I mean, I'm just trying to think of when the Gannon resolution was resolved finally in June of 2019. But prior to that, year after year after year after year, we didn't know what our budget would be as close to August or July.
It would usually, that would be one of the items that would go into the veto session, which is in June. And then they would finalize the state budget in that base amount.
And then for many years had to go to court for approval. So it was those, Mary, to your point, there were multiple years running where it was on the brink at the end of June before we got rulings.
So just I can't even, I mean, Russ, you've been at it for a while, building budgets. And living with budgets, just the reliability of being able to predict what the funds will be to us with some degree of certainty is a novelty to be able to plan ahead. I think it's worth acknowledging that.
Moving on to the LOB fund authority. So that's also called our supplemental general fund. Like I said, those are all local taxes. And again, this is a state-driven school finance formula. It takes that weighted FTE and then adds that special education component to it, so it flows through so you can get LOB dollars on that. We are at 33%, that's the most you can be, and that generates about $63 million in our LOB. Okay? Then special ed is funded a little bit differently. It is based on a reimbursement rate that the state tells us to build our budget on, which is $30,085. We get paid, we get 100% for a sped teacher at $30,000. Just put that in context, our average teacher salary and benefits for a sped teacher is probably in the $78,000 range, and the state's reimbursing us $30,000 for that. So the difference comes out of our LOB or our operating funds.
What should the state be reimbursing you, Russ?
Their target is 92%. They're currently at 68.
67%, I think, is
And
for
it's-
next year.
And it's getting smaller.
Yeah.
It's going in the wrong direction.
And did you already say the 92 number is a federal number?
92% is the state's number. I think the feds were supposed to be at like
40%, and
Okay.
they're,
When they originally passed it years and
17?
years ago.
Yeah, I didn't know if it was a federal number given to the state.
no, so the
that's separate.
federal funding should be 40% of what it costs. They're currently 17%.
I want to say 17 at most.
Okay.
And then the 92% is anything that isn't reimbursed by that federal amount is considered excess costs. The state law says state funding should cover 92% of the excess, and then the remainder is the local effort.
Okay, thank you for clarifying.
So if the federal government paid closer to their 40% of the mandate, there would be less burden on the states to make up that difference.
And if the state paid closer to their 92%, there would be less of a burden on your general operating budget.
That is correct. So quickly, paraprofessionals are at 40%. We get reimbursed 80% of our special education, student transportation costs. And that equates to about $22 million. And so our operating funds, 165 million of that comes from the general fund authority, state aid. LOB is all local taxes at 63 million. Special education reimbursement is at 23 million, and that generates about $256 million in revenue to spend in our operating funds. Then our operating funds, this is kind of a pie chart of how we spend our money. As I mentioned earlier, we're labor intensive. 84% goes for salary and benefits. A little breakout of teachers, psychologists, administrators, classified, other salaries. You can see those there. Benefits is a huge chunk. As you know, health insurance for all public or private companies just eats away your budget, your revenues more and more each year. Student transportation, utilities, supplies and services, and we have about $3 million in other that all comes out of the operating funds. Go ahead, Mary.
So the 13 million for administrators, just looking at that slice, that looks like it includes not only central administration, which might be a fraction of that, central services is in there, and building principals are in there as well?
Yes, correct.
Thanks.
Yeah. You got it. All right, so this slide we use often, and it just is a good slide that it looks busy, but it just summarizes each of the 3 prior actual fiscal years, and then anticipated 21, 22 there is what we went into this year's, that the budget was approved in August. And it compares the revenue and expenditures, and I'll draw you to the blue highlighted row. We use the term surplus and deficit. All that means is a surplus is in any particular year when our revenues exceed our expenditures. We call that a surplus. vice versa. If expenditures are more than revenues, we call it a deficit, and that comes from our fund balances. In the governmental world, we call our cash balances fund balances. Ryan, you probably call it cash. So in 1819, we deficit 1.1. 1920, we surplus 5, and that was all generated because of the pandemic. We went remote spring break in March. Buildings were closed down. Utility savings came rolling in, student transportation savings, no travel for teachers and going places because a lot of the PD is done, professional development is done in May, June, July over the summertime. And so at the very end of the school year, we saw a lot of savings, so we had $5 million there. Last year, 2.4 surplus. And then going into this year, we had a deficit. We approved a budget of a $528,000 deficit. We'll present a projected for the current year at our workshops. We're doing better than the $528,000 deficit there. So I'll draw your attention down to the orange yellowish lines there. So the balance as a percent of expenditure, our target has always been in that 10 to 15%, and I got a slide to talk a little bit more about that next. And as you can see, we were at 7.89, 9.84, 10.73. We got within that range, and so the budget we approved for this year was right at 10%. So when we talk about that, that is a percent of a monthly expenditure amount. So our target is to always have 10% of in our fund balances to cover 1 month, because we don't want to be late on our payroll. Okay? So,
So Susan, this is, I think, a little bit to your question,
yeah.
right?
So the board created 2 new policies, in 2020 maybe? Board policy DBB. So there's 2 things here. One talks about our target as a district. We want to be in that 10 to 15% ending fund balance range, and go no lower than 8.3. So 8.3 really represents 1 month. 10% would be just slightly more than 1 month. So if we have to go 8.3%, then we're going to go into a budget reduction mode, something like Blue Valley and Olathe do, because we don't want to go below that 1%. So it does a lot of things. It's stable. It's good business practice. It stabilizes your financials. But then when we're going out and selling bonds, they look at our fund balances, and that's how we get the AAA rating. If we get a AAA rating, we get better coupon rates. So if you're thinking about getting a mortgage on your house, the better your credit rating, the better your interest rate. The better our AAA, the better we can go sell bonds and market them on the market. And in turn, that reduces the amount of bond and interest that we have to ask our community to pay back. So it's less debt, less tax burden if we can get a AAA rating and lower that debt. So it all kind of comes into play. So I thought this was a great thing that the board did. It stabilizes it and makes our target in the 10 to 15% range. The other thing we did, Susan, that you kind of asked earlier, is we didn't want to put a burden on our capital outlay funds, because we got 60 buildings across our district that we have to maintain a lot of things to do. HVAC, parking, roofs, they're all on cycle budgets, and we generate approximately about $36 million a year. So that second component, we said we're going to limit the amount of salary and benefits that we put into the capital outlay at 25% of the property tax amount. So basically 1/4 of our revenue budget we're going to dedicate to salary and benefits. And that's right around the $9.4 million mark. And so we already had close to $4 million in there of all those skilled tech positions I talked about. And we used the additional amount to move the custodial salaries over there to pay for that 5 out of 7 that came out of the strategic plan. So that's kind of where we're capped. So right now, Susan, we don't even have any room really to move any more salary and benefits over there to adhere to the 25% board policy. Okay?
If I could add some color to this too, from a board perspective, we're always looking at all these different buckets and trying to figure out what's the source of that revenue, what's the use of those funds, and what's the likelihood of change in any of these. We're very blessed in Shawnee Mission to have our patrons continually approve our bonds that we've gone to the public with. That allows us to not have to dip into capital outlay as stressed as we might otherwise have to. And again, heaven forbid if there's ever a situation where we need to go back to the public to maintain our buildings and we don't pass a bond, we would really have to lean on capital outlay to help patch the building, so to speak. So that's the other part too, that we're trying to use the governor, so to speak, to try to, or the regulators to try to figure out how much do we take out of each of those, even in a worst case scenario too, because ultimately we have to insure ourselves. And that's why some of these fund balances are important too.
Okay, so I was going to cover capital and debt retirement funds real quick and try to wrap this up. So we talked a little bit about capital and the things that we can use that for. Again, we get no state aid for capital outlay. We do not qualify, so all that is local taxes. The most you can levy is 8 mills. We have done that for each year that I've been here. Once upon a time, it was actually went up to 11 or 12 mills, but right now the state law says the most you can levy is 8 mills, and we're at that. We generate about $35 million in total taxes locally. So our total budget available to spend in capital outlay in 1 year is $52 million.
Okay, I'm sorry, I have another, just thought, is this part of the revenue neutral?
Oh, I'm sorry. There we go. Capital outlay?
Yeah, does that fall under that revenue neutral?
All our mill levies fall under that calculation.
Okay.
Yeah, all of them do. So that's kind of our funding scenario there for capital outlay. Here's how we spend it. Schools and departments, we give them, they spend about $2 million on furniture, equipment replacement, athletic equipment, performing arts, you name it, out in the school buildings. Technology is getting more and more robust each year, so we spend, and with the expanded guidelines, we move quite a bit of our technology purchases over there. So this isn't even the technology here isn't even the Apple devices. This is just the day-to-day, the large software purchases that we buy to just run the district, cyber protection of all our data, servers, you name it. Operation and maintenance is close to $13 million. That's Tyler's slush fund to go take care of all our parking, bleachers, roofs, HVAC, all those cycle projects, the day-to-day breakage of windows and glass and painting all comes out of there. We have all our own crews, and we don't outsource, and we use that money to do that for, again, for 60 buildings. Salary and benefits, we're at $7.1 million, and like I said, in next 22-23, we'll move the remaining $2.3 million over there, and that'll put us at the $9.4 million in salary and benefits, and that'll butt us right up to that 25% amount. So we'll keep that maxed out. Bond and Apple lease payments. We did, you can do bonds out of capital outlay, and they're only for 5 years, and we did do that to build this building and a few others. That debt is all going to be retired in 22-23, so that goes away. That's $10 million that goes away. That frees up to do a lot of other different things, probably more of the HVAC that we talked about. We get such fabulous, we get 0% lease offers through Apple financing when we buy all our Apple devices are on a cycle. We usually, like the Macs, go for 4 years and then we refresh. So we're refreshing those right now. Over this summer, everybody's going to get a new Mac at the secondary level, and then after that it'll be iPads. And we get 0% financing, and we lease those and pay those off over 4 years, which lessens the burden on the capital outlay fund. We can spread that out. So again, we set a budget about $47 million. We like to have, we don't want to go below $5 million. We actually like to keep it higher than that, more in the $10 million, but again, that's just a good, healthy fund balance in case of emergency arises, and also it's kind of a cash flow issue from the time you get your taxes from the county and when you're doing a lot of your actual construction work. Okay? And then this is just quickly the bonds that we have outstanding right now. So we're working off issue 1, $132 million. The blue represents what we spent or encumbered. Our cash flow is still good here, that we don't have to issue number 2 just yet, but we anticipate issuing that this coming fiscal year. Probably we'll start that process it takes about 90 days to sell bonds, so we might start that in December and have that money available in the spring. So a lot of the projects have already been bid and are under purchase orders. So that's kind of where we're at on the dollar amount there. And then lastly, this is just a look at all our different mill levies. The board approves these, but honestly, outside of the capital outlay levy, you really don't have any control on really where you want to set that. The general fund is state statute, so you have to do 20. The school finance formula backs into the LOB mill levy for you. You can go lower than that, but you have to set it to get enough revenues to cover what your expenditure budget is. And then the rest of those are all very similar. It goes through a budgeting process that calculates that mill levy for you. So there's not a lot of discretion in there by a Board of Education in Kansas to set those mill levies other than to go lower than what the budget would indicate. And so you can see where we stack up. We're the lowest of all the 6 Johnson County schools. Okay, and that concludes my little portion. So if you've got any more questions, we can take those.
Thank you, Russ.
Yep.
You go through that, are there 3, like, if you have like a top 3 every year that are like big head scratchers, like, how are we getting to this? Like, are there key topics where you have a top 3 every year going, okay, this is going to be my biggest challenge, and then it's consistent from year to year, or does it move around, your biggest problems?
Like what
The
I'm,
biggest challenges. as
biggest
far as
challenges?
What are buckets, what to do, like.
The biggest challenge is the operating funds each year, and then the next one, that would be negotiations, trying to find a pot of money to do salary and benefit increases. Because, we get $4 million more from the state, but at the same time, my transportation contract went up, my utilities are going up, my health insurance is going up, and so that all comes from that $4 million. And that's the part that's hard to understand, that in the public, that Shawnee Mission gets $4 million. Well, we can do $4 million in raises. Well, I really can't. I can do $4 million minus all these other things, and then I have that.
Well,
change to work.
and that 4 million might be parsed between certain funds that are generating it. So some of that is because of the at-risk weighting, but you are required to direct those to specific activities by the legislature, right?
That's correct.
So it always is very deep in those weeds to try and explain that, but it isn't all discretionary dollars that you're allowed to spend.
And I'd say don't forget insurance and now cybersecurity, which is going through the roof. So we're right in the middle of those types of negotiations as well as training, and it's interesting times.
You mentioned having to do budget reductions. How often does the district have to do that?
We've been fortunate that we're let's all knock on wood, that we're kind of on a roll here that we haven't had to do those budget reductions. But I came to the district in December of '98, and I maybe had as the budget manager, and I had maybe 1 year where I didn't have to deal with it, and then right like my second year in, I think I've been doing budget reduction since 2001 all the way through 2013. So,
And is that done quarterly or monthly?
it's usually on an annual basis, and we've taken different approaches over the years.
Mm-hmm.
The very first one was a huge stakeholders committee, about 30 folks, principals, students, patrons, look at how we could trim our budget at that time.
Mm-hmm.
Was that around the recession, or was that prior to that?
That was prior to the recession. Then we got a little break, and then the recession of 2009 through about 2012, that's when the state slashed that base amount that you saw. That was 4,400. State law at that time said it was supposed to be like 4,500 in that area, 4,500.
You should have that memorized.
And it,
And they were funding it at 3,800.
And
they-
cut it,
in the middle of the
2008-9 school year, the budget got cut by the legislature in the 2009 cycle, like 5 times?
yeah.
Is that the mechanisms for decreasing the budget, is that automated? What are the more common mechanisms for reducing the budget? Is it a committee hearing where you just determine how that's cut, or I don't know.
Like the different types that we've used
Yeah.
over here. We did the stakeholders committee. We formed a priority list of like 10 items, and we threw that out to the community and say, hey, prioritize these. We had, if it's small enough, maybe in our case, maybe 2 to 3 million, we'll do it internally through our leadership team. We've done budget workshops with the board, getting their feedback to do that as well.
So it depends.
Yeah.
What role would you say the strategic plan has in that process today?
Well, I'd say the strategic plan is completely guiding us, and I'd also say, looking at those trends, so we're far enough along with the strategic plan, which it will continue to grow. It's nice to be able to look back and see again where we started and where we're at. It's the same way when it comes to budgets, to see what's left over, making sure people just aren't spending money on excess to get their budget emptied, which is a challenge that we face sometimes. Sometimes we get to keep the money, sometimes we don't. And so again, that goes into Russ's hands. But I didn't know you've been here that long, Russ. I'm amazed we continued to stay afloat. That's impressive.
I don't think that'll do it.
Thank you. Other questions?
Great question.
Yeah. Well, and I'll say this for Kevin's sake, I've been seeing presentations like this for almost 20 years, and I learn something every single time. So by no means should you feel like you need to know all the moving parts, but your engagement's very helpful. Thank you. With that, let's transition to the bond update.
Go ahead and give a quick bond update. I know we're getting close to the end of time, but I really want to get sure to get to Tyler and to make sure that we can see some of the fun pictures and the updates. I will tell you this, $264 million bond. It's exciting. People are excited about new buildings, $3 million to each middle school, 4.6 to each high school. All of the, the shiny objects that we get to purchase and to go across our district are fun. But I would tell you this, before inflation came, I had a lot more hair and it was very dark brown. So the challenge we're facing right now really comes with the price of materials, the supply chain, the price of labor, and many of these, and all of the bond was estimated before this inflationary process took place. And so we are facing a lot of challenges coming up on projects as well as buildings, and upwards of 20, 30, 40 to 45% more than was anticipated. So those are some of the challenges. I don't want to be Debbie Downer, but I want to show you the good things. But I will tell you, we're working really hard to be fiscally responsible and to make sure that we follow through with all the things that we promised the community, because that's what we will do. So Tyler, I'm going to turn it over to you if you want to show some good news here and some nice pictures.
Yeah, thank you. So I don't want anybody to get confused on the first sheet. So look at it from 30,000 foot. All I really want to do right now on this timeline is just to show you where we're at on the bond. So that the vertical red line shows it right now, March in 22, and it kind of, I wanted to lean back on one of the slides that Russ had, and it was showing how we're going to sell the bond twice, and that first one is just about used up, and we need to sell to get the second $112 million for the bond purchases. But that was really strategically on us, front-loading this bond to stay away from the 3% every year of inflation, and the forethought of that. So, I mean, right out of the gate, first year, basically, right, 3 new elementary schools and averaging $25 million apiece, it's going to utilize those funds in a hurry. But Yep.
Is the blue construction phase on that prior slide? The blue?
It is. So, and how this is labeled out, and we have this sheet on the district website, but it's, at the beginning of it, the purple was the pre-bond, that was the design phase where we're going to add. So when it does pass, we can hit the ground running. And it did overlap into that light green where it is designed, and kind of show it through all 5 years. You see the design, but when it is that blue, it is in the construction phase for the most part. The only time that really doesn't play a role is on the furniture piece, but that's until you basically receive the furniture, it's mostly a design phase that whole time anyway. So I'm going to cover the 3 elementary schools in tonight. What I want to do is show the rendering of what that, the architectural view of what that's going to be, and then what a live picture of where we're at. So this is one of the most recent aerial photos of Westwood View. And here on each one of these slides, all I'm going to do is just kind of remind everybody who we're utilizing and who we're working with on each one of these projects. So Westwood View, it's a Hollis & Miller architect. Newkirk Novak is our construction manager. This building's about 68,000 square feet. And as of today, on the construction schedule, the roofing's completed. That building's dried in. They're doing masonry, drywall, tiles up. They're painting, and MEP, mechanical, electrical, plumbing. All of that is underway. Site grading, sidewalks are being poured. They're trying to do that finalized site grading, get ready for that asphalt parking lot phase. And just a reminder, Westwood View, a lot of us were there, so we were able to tour that building on March 8th and see that progress and how good it's going. So for each one of these projects, and what I wanted to try to add is we get some bi-weekly progress reports. So just kind of justify exactly what we just covered on this, and it is blind. I got to use my laptop. Sorry. But you can see the gym duct work. You can see the learning stair concretes poured in the back. You see the walls. You can see the fresh paint. You see the carpet installed in some of the classrooms and the grid work going up, etc. So that's what we'll do for.
I think one of the fun elements in walking through that tour of Westwood was the outdoor learning spaces. So all of the elementary buildings have these covered outdoor learning spaces, which is, they're just fantastic.
Each one's going to have one in a different location, right? But like what we did see at Westwood on the tour were the 2 upstairs outdoor classrooms, but they didn't have these learning stairs. And if you remember that corridor that went out through the back to access the playground, but where that gym wall comes down is where they incorporated it. They kind of needed a retaining wall anyway, but we came in, there were some learning stairs to give that opportunity on that backside. So the second elementary school here is John Deemer. This one, we're working with Insight Design Studios and J.E. Dunn. This elementary school is a little larger. It's 78,000 square feet. And I like this rendering. I like this progress picture. You can see that the architectural design on that front entry, that canopy, the second floor, with the structural steel. And where this building is currently is fun. You need to drive by it weekly because there will be major changes every week. And so you see the structural steel, then you see the sheathing go up, and then the windows are coming in, and then masonry, and then every week progress is changing. And next 3 months at Deemer will be real fun to watch.
Reminder, it's 99th and Lamar.
That's right. So it is the more of those bi-weekly construction updates. And so you can see the phases, see the sheathing, the waterproofing, structural steel. They're, if they can, they got an area inside, they're running piping conduit, and they have it. Impressed with both companies. They're the schedules are good and they're getting the work done that they can. Pawnee. So this is the same architectural firm as Westwood View. So we're using Hollis and Miller, also using Newkirk Novak again with them. Pawnee's estimate is going to be around 76,000 square feet. We received bids for Pawnee back in October, and over the course of spring break that we just passed by a couple weeks ago, is they're mobilized on site, and so I'll go ahead and go to this next slide to show you. But Pawnee's new building is going to sit behind the existing building. So what's different on this third one is we're actually building on site while the old building is still there. So Deemer, they changed locations. Westwood View is on a different piece of property. Pawnee, each one's a different animal, and this one here is we're building a school while the old one sits right out in front of it.
And you see that challenge in that top right picture. So we had a real issue when you build it on site of pick up and drop off and how that worked. And so we had to create our own circle drive back there behind the building for pickup and delivery. And the reason we had to bring it back so far and make it so tight was because we couldn't have all that traffic out there on 91st Street. That was, yes, yes. So it's tight, but it works. A ton of work was done over spring break. And we somehow made it work. So we feel good about that. And Pawnee's been great, and they've adjusted, and the principal's great, the teachers have been great to work with, and the parents have been awesome and very understanding. So it's kind of old hat now, but it was a little touch and go at first.
So Indian Woods, one of our remodel projects. And what we wanted to do here is we brought in Insight Architectural Studio, working with Jay Dunn, and working through the process, what do we need, and so we did our restroom remodels, and added a 3-story addition on that building, so and it just added tons of collaboration space and some classrooms. But as of progress right now, where we're standing on Indian Woods is, I'll skip to the bottom line, is the fun one. Substantial completion date's April 15th. But to stay on that schedule, flooring needs to begin on April 4th. The painting, windows are going in. It's getting there. The only caveat to what I want to say on this is that addition, that will be completed to a point that it could be utilized. But we are still, this summer, I'm going to come back and with tying that building in and working with the architects and the construction firms. And it wasn't originally scoped or designed to do it, but we're going to roll through all 3 floors down that hallway where the addition meets and put new grid, new drop ceiling, new LED lights just to tie everything in together. So that'll happen this summer, start school next year, this be 100% ready to go. I put these two together, which they are in my world, but it's the same architectural firm and construction company are doing these remodels. And so Shawnee Mission North, 6,700 square foot weight room addition, along with three major restroom renovation areas. But along with their construction schedule, that is it's coming too. It's kind of past its time, what I was talking about with Deemer about needing to drive by and look at the changes, but it's still there, still fun. All the structural steel is up. They've measured for the glass and the jams, but being that weight room space and the final design on it, there's going to be a lot of glass, and it might look unfinished, but as soon as that comes in, it'll start wrapping up a lot faster. But it's going to be completed this summer in June. And we're about the same set at Shawnee Mission Northwest, and so that renovation of the interior space, you can see a lot of that final detail is being installed right now. One of the things that we're dealing with is procurement issues, and we've been waiting for glass for the last 2 months. There's one item that hasn't showed up yet, and I kind of need the glass because it's incorporated with my railings on the balcony. And so once that comes in, it's okay. that whole area is a flooring scope. And so I can't necessarily do we can build a temporary wall and do construction behind that wall, but once I tie in the flooring through the cafeteria in this small space, then I'll have to do it this summer. So same thing, this will wrap up in June, July this summer. That renovation will be completed. Just a quick part of the, bond, we had the athletic facility upgrades, and one of them that we did, that completed, we were able to slide in, really worked out really good. Believe it or not, we did a good turf project over the course of the winter. And so one of the softball, we have a state softball complex. We have 4 fields there. One of them has always been turf. It lasted for about 12 years, went about 4 years past its life expectancy. So this is a new turf project there at that stadium. And then just like Indian Woods and North and Northwest, we had that remodel schedule, and these are the next ones on the list. This is where we're at with what we want to kick off this summer. And these are the projects and the locations where they're going to be at. So East, Insight in Newkirk, we have a restroom renovation and an addition. Horizons, a lot of remodel spaces on the inside that DLR and Appleton are going to work on. Westridge, DLR and Dunn are going to work together on a remodel scope there. And then the Early Childhood Center. That is Early Childhood Center / Broadmoor, but there's a real nice renovation going on there too. Unfortunately, with that one, I had to break it down in 2 phases. So we'll have a phase this summer, and then next summer we'll be able to procure the items needed inside those classrooms to finish it up and make it a 2-year project. But given only 3 months, there's a lot of work that needed to happen there, and we couldn't necessarily pull it all off in one summer. And then more information on projects where we're at. So these are projects, I want to call them, but it's what we know. We've already passed these through the board motions, so we know the locations, know what we want to do, have the designs, the plans, everybody's on board. But so HVAC, and we work and train as one of our major, lack of word here for, yeah, not really a vendor, but it's partners that we work with to do the HVAC projects, in coalition with Children's Mercy, right? And so phase 2 HVAC projects with Train, but McAuliffe East, Northwest, Indian Creek and Northwest, and Shawnee Mission East. So the pool packs at those 2 high schools that's going to happen this summer. Athletic fields and upgrades, track issues at West and Northwest, so replacement either, and it could be a full replacement, and one of them is, forgive me, I'm sorry, I don't remember which one it is, but I think it's West, but the base layer is bad, and so we have to go with the new asphalt base layer, and then the track surface on top, and Northwest is just an annual, so all this, everything has a life cycle, and so even believe it or not, even a track surface, 10, 12 years, and you have to go back in and replace that 2-inch top and respray them and paint them. And then this summer's playground, we're picking up 4 elementary schools: Corinth, Highlands, Rising Star, and Rose Hill. And this summer's furniture package incorporates 2 high schools and a middle school. So it's, we dipped our toes in the water last year on the furniture package, and just did 1 high school. It's a pretty major undertaking, changing out all furniture, but have good companies on board. We're able to do 2 high schools and a middle school this summer. And
I've found it in doing school, so the administrative team does school visits on Thursday morning, so.
Correct.
Right? So to
Correct.
the extent that central administrative staff are not engaged in another meeting, out and about in the schools in the mornings on Thursdays. So school board members can join along. And the furniture conversations, always, I don't know why it kind of, It just, when a building gets new furniture or space, it has a real powerful impact on learning, just even changing up the furniture and being able to use that learning space differently. I hear that consistently from principals and teachers. It's powerful.
I'd agree. We hear it all the time, too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Questions? Yeah.
I'd like to just make a comment, really compliment. When we toured Westwood View Elementary, it was amazing, as you said, to see the learning space. It was also really wonderful to see the creative partnership with the, I guess it really would be the soccer field, and also there was a, I'm not sure what you would call it, in the area of the multipurpose room where there's kind of
Stage.
like a stage that could be
Yes.
removable, or almost like a Murphy bed pull-up. But it was very amazing to see that, and it was invigorating, I think, for community to be involved in that. And just want to say, I think that's terrific, and it was a wonderful opportunity to see that space and not just see it on paper. As a
Right.
retired CFO, numbers are numbers, but when you get to see how it impacts students and administration, faculty, teachers, it just makes a big difference. So thank you for that. Yeah, I can't wait to see them on the stage there. I think that'll be exciting.
Well, and we're getting ready to do the groundbreaking next Tuesday.
Tuesday.
We've moved it a
April
couple of
5th.
times, so
Correct.
make sure that
Cross
everybody
our
knows.
fingers
At
and-
Pawnee.
Third time's the
At
charm.
Pawnee,
Third time's
yeah.
the charm, that's correct.
So you're more than welcome to attend those as well. It's kind of interesting to see it from that stage to the part that we toured at Westwood, and then
Yeah.
cutting the ribbon when it's open.
Okay.
Other questions, comments?
No?
Anything else?
I've got 2 more slides, nothing important. I don't want to interrupt you, but
Okay.
it's basically echoing Russ's slides earlier, but on that main schedule, that Gantt chart, 2021, 22, 23, 24 as we go along, just keeping track, and you can see it once it's on this paper here and see how front-heavy this bond was, but that 2021 package, we utilized $126 million worth of the bond funds. And then 2022 we're at $50 million utilized, and so far through this course of the bond on the second year.
Okay, great. Thank you for that. It's an awful lot that's been put together by our team here, so thank you very much. You can see the incredible amount of work that goes into juggling all these projects and all the budgets and trying to keep this finances moving forward. So thank you for all of that. If there's any follow-up questions as well, if you just want to shoot them to me, if there's something later that you want to follow up on, let me know. I'll also encourage folks to turn to the board member who appointed them and engage them in a question or a conversation too, because we learn when we interact with folks with questions. Because if we don't know the answer, we certainly will go find out, and then we learn something too. With that, we're wrapped up at the very bottom of the agenda here. We've got our schedule for our next meetings. April 14th is scheduled as next. Normally, there's a bigger gap between meetings, but this meeting kept getting pushed to this point. So April 14th, and as Russ showed us, we'll be at a different spot in the budget cycle there to get new updates. With that, we are adjourned. Thanks for being here.
Thank
All right. Thank you.